Welcome to the Autism Outreach Podcast. Today we are talking all about dyslexia, and we're also talking about how to embed literacy within our sessions. So if you have students who either have a diagnosis of dyslexia or you have students who are having trouble and struggling with reading, writing, spelling, speaking, and comprehension, you are going to want to listen to this episode. Jeannette shares with us, I have Jeannette Roberes, who is a fellow speech-language pathologist. She shares with us how to embed literacy into our sessions, and it's really great information for all learners. So we also talk about what does a multisensory approach to literacy look like? What is the role of the speech-language pathologist when we're supporting students who are struggling in these areas? And how we also need to value diversity, and that books need to be mirrors, stepping stones, springboards, and sliding glass doors. I had never heard that before, and I really love it so much. You know, Jeannette, probably from Instagram and all social media, is Barely Articulating. She is an author that has worked as a speech language pathologist, software engineer, and educator. She just got back from West Africa and Kenya. She has spoken in over 40 countries. She has such an amazing body of work, and she just wrote a new book called Technical Difficulties: Why Dyslexic Narratives Matter in Tech. I can't wait for you to dig into this episode and to get inspired on how to embed literacy into your sessions to support your students with dyslexia, autism, and anybody who's struggling with those different tenets. Let's dig on in.
You're listening to Autism Outreach Podcast, a podcast full of ready-to-use strategies to help those with autism strengthen their communication skills. Here's your host, Rose Griffin of ABA Speech, a speech therapist and board-certified behavior analyst who shares tips you can use in your next therapy session.
Thanks so much for joining us today on episode 65. We have an amazing episode today. We have with us Jeannette Roberes. Thanks so much for joining us. It's so great to have you on.
Thank you, Rose, for having me, inviting me, and just being your chipper, cheery self. And I want to say, I really appreciate how exquisitely you pronounced my name. Thank you.
Thank you. Because names, everybody, it's funny. I live in a neighborhood and we have found out over the past 5 years that we've been saying every single person's name wrong. So my husband will be very proud of me that I nailed that name. So thank you for the pep talk there. It's really nice to meet you in real life. We were chatting before I pressed record, and I feel like we did last year like a collab, a TikTok collab, and put it on Instagram Reels and all that good stuff. So you've been in my orbit for a while, and I was like, oh, I need to have her on. And you have such an area of expertise, so I'm excited just to learn more about you and your journey to becoming a speech therapist and all that good stuff. So if people are not familiar with you, can you tell us a little bit about you, your journey, how you became a speech therapist? And I know you specialize in dyslexia, and just kind of how that journey started for you.
Awesome. So who doesn't love to talk about themselves, right? So I started my journey as an SLP in 2011. And I worked in Jackson, Mississippi. Shout out to Jackson State University. And with that in mind, my caseload at the public school was primarily students that had language-based learning disorders. And the word dyslexia was thrown out a couple of times, but it wasn't legitimate just yet within the scope of legislation. So it was something that people said, maybe, possibly, I don't know, it sounds like this, but they weren't sure, and they could not diagnose someone as such without, going through the proper channels that were necessary. So with this word being a buzzword, I decided to start looking further into this. And I'm saying, majority of my caseload has these very specific characteristics. And I want to be able to treat and intervene with these individuals at their level. So, and when I say individuals, I mean students. I don't know why I'm trying to make it seem like I'm working in some private practice setting or something. So I wanted to know how to meet the students where they were. And so I went on a Google spree, and I was searching away all the ways in which I could become more proficient as an SLP, more efficient with treating, diagnosing, and even intervening with someone who had dyslexia. So, with that in mind, took a few courses, got a few certificates in that space, and then I fully felt like I was ready to start working specifically with that particular language-based learning disorder. I created a private practice where I provided Orton Gillingham trained tutoring for students, and then I moved cross state. So, well, not, I'm sorry, let me dial back, not cross state, cross country. So I moved from Mississippi to Michigan. And when I got to Michigan, I was in a state of wanting to reinvent myself. So I did all of this great work over here in Mississippi. I even worked with the governor at a point where we created legislation so that students could be assessed at kindergarten to first grade, and then they would be on a pathway to intervention. So if you are looking for a state that is doing some amazing things in the dyslexia space, Mississippi is certainly it. But having moved to Michigan, I started looking more into voice recognition, AAC, and technologies, assistive devices and tools, because again, I was wanting to reinvent myself. So within that space, I learned how to program and I learned how to code. And I started kind of working on the tech side of things. And now I would say that I am kind of intersecting the two. So I have this background in dyslexia intervention. And then I'm also working to help tech companies create pathways for adults who have these innovative and imaginative brains, and they're finding it hard to fit into that proverbial, like, what is it, the round hole in the square peg
Yeah.
sort of situation.
Oh,
So
interesting.
yeah, that's my current work as a speech language pathologist and software engineer. I am also the founder and CEO of Barely Articulating. So just a little bit about me.
Yeah, busy, busy. I love
Yeah.
it. So are you practicing, and do you have a private practice now? Are you seeing clients too? Or are you doing more systems and helping out with software and things like that?
So that's a great question. I will say that at this juncture, I am focused on creating courses
Oh,
around either the two. So I've taken a step back from practicing privately, and now I'm looking at creating that income that will allow me to create amazing bodies of work online and people can access it with ease. So I'm going to be working with a couple different companies to create um, different resources around literacy based speech and language therapy,
hmm.
around assistive technology and what that looks like for dyslexic learners,
Hmm.
and everything that kind of falls into that purview.
Oh, that's awesome. That sounds very exciting and stuff that I love to do too. So, yay, I knew we were going to get along. So, for our listeners that may not be familiar with dyslexia, I'm wondering initially, do you know what the prevalence rate of dyslexia is? Is it considered low incidence, or do you know, like, is there an incidence rate that they have, like a statistic that they talk about?
So, usually, the statistic that everyone kind of harps on is based off a study done in Yale University, which states that dyslexia affects 20% of the population,
Oh,
and it represents 80 to 90% of all those with learning disabilities. It's extremely common,
yeah.
and what you'll find is about 70 to 80% of those who have IEPs,
Mhm.
um, they kind of fall somewhere within the commonality of dyslexia.
Oh, okay.
Hmm.
Okay. I wasn't aware of that. But as I was getting ready for your
Yeah.
podcast, yesterday I watched, my son is 6 and he's very obsessed with football. So we rented the movie Rudy. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but Rudy Rudiger was this guy. It's a true story.
Hmm.
He was 5'6", but anyway, he had this lifelong dream to go to Notre Dame, and he ended up going, and he actually got into the game at the end. But I was watching the credits at the end. It was just yesterday, and it said that he had dyslexia. I was like, oh my
Mm.
gosh. And it's so interesting that I was telling my daughter that I was doing this podcast today and what your area of specialty is. And she said, you know what? My teacher actually has dyslexia. And,
Wow. Love it.
she got bullied for it in high school. Like she was just telling me
Hmm.
all this stuff. I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know. So, I mean, the fact
Yeah.
that you're saying that it really does affect a lot of people, I think it's
Mhm.
something to really talk about, because I feel like it's not something that I've really had a lot of coursework in. Or I know you said that you
Absolutely.
started doing your own research, and that's
Mhm.
how you started specializing in it. That was kind of like me for autism. I was like, what am I doing
Yeah.
here? How can I help these kids? But for listeners, can you explain what dyslexia is? Like what the characteristics of it are?
Absolutely. So first, I want to say that when I said I love it about your daughter's teacher, it's because that transparency. I love that when teachers and SLPs, OTs, PTs, the whole gamut of us are just being truly authentic with our practices, and we're letting our students know, hey, these are some areas I struggled in. I think it gives us more of a actual factual relationship with them. It helps them see like we're human too.
Hmm.
So, if we're defining dyslexia, I will say that it is a combination of characteristics, and those characteristics can include reading, writing, um, spelling, and speaking, as well as comprehension. So, a person with dyslexia is going to struggle with those particular tenets. Usually, they have normal vision and intelligence, and some symptoms could include late talking, learning words very slowly, and a severe delay in reading if reading is not taught in that multisensory way. When I talk about multisensory, I'm meaning that you're including all of those senses that are pathways to the brain. So you are providing them with an opportunity to manipulate the sounds. You are providing them an opportunity to say the sounds, to see the sounds, to hear the sound, so all of those bases are covered. And it's not just a sit and get situation when you're teaching dyslexic learners to read.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. So what is, I remember when I worked down in Austin, Texas, I worked in this amazing, so I live in Ohio now, a suburb of Cleveland, and that's where I'm from. But me and my husband, when we got married, we lived in Austin, Texas, and I had this really cool job as an autism facilitator, but it was a 35 school district. So we had
Mhm.
just this amazing programming because it was just so large. And I remember that certain campuses had a program that was geared towards students who had dyslexia. It was like very specific intervention. And so I feel like I haven't really worked with a student who had that diagnosis all the way you're talking about it. I probably have, and maybe they didn't diagnosis, right? Who knows? But what is the role of the speech therapist typically? Do you think that there's a lot of kids out there that maybe have dyslexia that goes undiagnosed? Is that something that they talk about in the field?
Absolutely. I believe that there are tons of SLPs who have children on their caseload, especially in the education setting, and they are not quite aware of how to treat and intervene with this language-based learning disorder. And I think it truly stems from us having not enough of this information imparted on us in graduate school. So a lot of the coursework that we took in undergrad and grad school was not about dyslexia specifically. And I think that that did create a barrier as we're going out and we're working. Now, truth be told, after you get out of college and formal education, you are not expected to know everything. There are going to be some things that can take you off your mark. There are still things to this day when it comes to swallowing that I'm like, listen, that's
Mm-mm.
out of my wheelhouse. Like
Right.
I can provide the anatomy but that's probably where
Good,
it's going to
good
end for
for you.
me.
I'm done with that. And there's just certain things I do. You know what I mean? Like, but yeah, no, I don't think people outside of our practice understand how broad our scope is. So I know that, I am on
Mhm,
Facebook some and some of the groups I'm in. I was actually just talking with some people in the
mhm,
middle school, high school SLP, and they were like, I have this advocate and I'm in a meeting and, they're, being so cruel about some kind of vocabulary goal. I was like, oh my gosh, I just went through that this year. I think sometimes when we meet people from outside of the SLP world, they are confused on maybe why a speech therapist doesn't understand like dyslexia or why a speech therapist doesn't understand feeding or why they don't
mhm,
understand autism or don't feel comfortable with it. And we
mhm.
just have such a broad scope that I feel
Agreed.
like you learn so much in graduate school, but if you're going to specialize, that really does happen outside when you're in the field because it's just
Mhm.
so broad what we do.
And I think there should be more conversations around creating specializations. Um, I don't think that was even an option for me. It was just go out in the world and be yourself and do what we taught you. It's like, well, wait, I still have questions.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I definitely believe that there should be professors that are helping us hone our specialties. If at the very least, if they don't teach us these specific things about like dyslexia or dyspraxia, then they should certainly be kind of the ones to prod and push us so we can do it all in graduate school. When we get out, we might be a little more ready to
Mhm.
tackle these things as they come to us. So I will say that while the teacher is trained in instruction, because I think about teachers versus SLPs, the SLP is trained in intervention. So our knowledge base includes the developmental sequence of phoneme acquisition, the complexity of phoneme production, and those things we do need to tap into as we're working with dyslexic learners.
That's great. So, as a speech therapist on a public school team, do you
Mhm.
feel like, are special education teachers receiving instruction that would help with students who have dyslexia? I'm just wondering, as a speech therapist, if we don't have all that specific information,
Mhm.
we're definitely a part of the team. Um, and as a special education teacher, do you think that they get more training on dyslexia, or do you think it's very much an area that is kind of underserved in our coursework and training across the board?
Unfortunately, I would say the latter, that it is something that is not really well researched or documented across the board. And I even think about legislation in states because provisions in each state may look different.
Mm.
I was told in a state that the word dyslexia wasn't even something that was supposed to be utilized because that particular state felt like we don't have enough information on this.
Wow.
So let's not go out and run and shout that word. Some states just don't have the adequate education base to I don't even know how to put this eloquently because I don't want to just say, this state is bad or this state
Yeah,
is
right.
good. But, like for currently, I live in Michigan and there are no provisions in place for individuals who have dyslexia. So you are kind of on your own, so to speak. And
Mhm.
for parents who don't or who are not able to get tested for dyslexia because they may say, they may go to their district and say, hey, this is what I suspect.
Mhm.
And you're looking at teachers, SOPs, and either even special education instructors, and they're like, we don't know which assessments to use, and we don't,
Right.
that's not a part of, and it's almost like everybody is kind of pinpointing other people to do it. Like, well, you do it. No, you do it. You do it because
Right. They're like,
nobody
I
wants
don't
to
know
get
what
caught.
to do. Yeah. So who can give a formal diagnosis of dyslexia then? Where do people or parents go if they're like, I'm wondering about this and I feel like my child might fit some of these characteristics. Like who can give an official diagnosis of that?
So that's a little blurry, but I will say neuropsychologists are, or educational psychologists are often
Mm.
helpful in recovering that diagnosis. SOPs can actually give a diagnosis as well. In addition, teachers who are properly trained can give a diagnosis of dyslexia as well. So it'll definitely depend on the state you're in and the knowledge that that particular professional would have. So, for instance, I've seen people go to colleges and they're on like really long waiting lists, but they're able to get diagnosis at colleges from students there who are being supervised. So, again, it's like the wild wild west
Right.
when it comes to when it comes to dyslexia. Everybody is trying to get in where they're fitting in,
Right.
and there's a lot of information that's being dispersed currently. It's changing rapidly. And as a quick plug, some of my colleagues and I are creating a book
Oh,
around how SLPs can become more prepared to assess, treat, and diagnose dyslexia. So shout out to my colleagues. You know who you are. And we're going to be putting a book out later this year
oh,
about
awesome.
how an SLP's role can really heighten that of someone with dyslexia.
Oh, that's great. I'm excited about that. That's awesome. Thanks for doing that. So, can you share with us some strategies on how we can implement some literacy based therapy for dyslexic learners? So, if people are listening and they do have students with dyslexia on their caseload, what are some ways that we could infuse some of that into our therapy?
All right. So, intervention for dyslexia should include, as I stated, that multisensory structured language approach, focusing on decoding, fluency training, vocabulary, and comprehension. Furthermore, you kind of want to make sure that you are tapping into those essential components of teaching, reading, which would be the big five. The big five is going to be phonemic awareness, the alphabetic principle, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. So when we are in therapy, I would say one of the more easier ways that I've found to like work on blending sounds and word sequence is using books. That to me is my lifeline. If I ever get to a point where I am in therapy and I'm like, man, I don't know what to do or how to work on blending sounds into word samples or anything like that, I'm grabbing books, segmenting sound sequence, manipulating sounds and word sequences. I'm tapping into books. I'm doing read alouds. We're looking at phonemic awareness skills. We can tap into fluency, morphology, semantics, like the whole nine, just by grabbing a book and creating some activities around that book. You can make it a whole thing. And it's also instilling that love of reading for children, because what I've seen with teachers, they're doing a lot of what's called close reading. So you can have maybe 3 or 4 therapy sessions where you're using the same book, but you are attacking it from different angles. You're using different means to read that book. So first, and this is just an example, top of the dome, first you introduce the book, you talk about what you think is going to happen inside of the book. Then you may tackle a couple vocabulary words and say, these are some of the words in the book. Let's talk about what we think they mean. That's an activity in itself. And then you actually can read the book. That's something there. And then ask questions around the book. Or I just thought about it, creating some definitions that have gestures related to them. Like, it's so many things you can do with a book that has maybe 6 or 7 pages. So for all SLPs listening, that's where you start. Make sure the book is diverse, it's inclusive, because I like to tell everybody, not just, teachers or SLPs, but we want to make sure we're preparing our children essentially for a world where they'll interact and intermingle with people that don't necessarily look like them. So if it's a book about a little boy in a wheelchair, that's a go. If it's a book about someone's culture and they're eating some different foods, that's a go. I mean, these are ways in which you're instilling that practice of, nobody, everybody doesn't look like you necessarily. They may not think like you, but we're going to still respect their diverse viewpoints and we're going to learn a little more about them.
I love that so much. I did a training, an ASHA approved training with Ashley Rossi, and she talked
Mhm.
about how books should be a window and a mirror. And I
Yes.
had never heard that before. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, I love that.
And
I
and
love that so much.
I'll go a little further. I just
Mhm.
posted about them being sliding glass doors,
Yeah.
and being stepping stones,
Hmm.
being a beacon of light. Like it's so much that a book can be to us.
Yes. Yeah. I love that so much. And I think that's just something to really keep, top of mind. And I know a lot of people post on Instagram, like different books, that they like to use and trying to infuse that. The school district that I work in is very, very diverse. One year, I thought this was so interesting. It was pre-pandemic. It was like 3 or 4 years ago. Um, but we were right by the Cleveland Clinic, so we get a lot of people that actually move in from all different parts of the world.
Mhm.
And we had parents come in from some of our more represented nationalities, and they did talks on for the whole district during a
Mhm.
PLC time. They did talks on common names in
Okay.
their languages and how to pronounce some of the names and just how powerful it is when
Mhm.
someone says your name, the way that it's supposed to be said,
Mhm.
and talked all about that. I thought that was really profound because, people may think that's not a big deal, but, it is if you're unfamiliar with how to say different things, and it makes kids feel good when, we're able to say their names correctly. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
And even if it means, you have a little note where you write it out and transcribe it so that
Right. Yes.
when you talk to that student you can glance quickly at that note and say it. So much is attached to our names, our identities, our
Mhm.
ancestors.
Right.
I have been spending a lot of time in West Africa. I actually just got back
Oh,
from Ghana,
oh wow.
and yeah, I just got back from Ghana. And I spent time in Kenya as well, which is in East Africa, and then Nigeria, which is again in West Africa, and
Mhm.
Togo. So I've been I've been some
Wow.
places on the continent. But what I will say, and what I'm trying to get around to saying, is that the names that they give their children there,
Mhm.
like absolutely amazing. And they'll say, like I'll always ask, what does this mean? And they'll
Oh,
say things like God loves me. And the name could be like Femi Oluwasewa, something that's
yeah.
just like, whoa,
Yeah.
this is next level.
Right.
So I'm a big fan of the fact that, our names, and I don't know if in America, because I definitely identify with American culture. My
Yeah.
father is Liberian, but I don't know if we really appreciate names as much as our counterparts overseas
Right.
appreciate names. Like they attach meaning and sacrifice and wonderful things to these names. Like this means leader, and this
Mhm.
means son of the most high. You like,
Yeah.
and what does my name mean?
I know, you're like, "Oh, that's so deep." I'm not feeling deep right now, my name. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah, well,
interesting.
I
Yeah.
did Google. I did Google my name. So Jeannette means gracious. And I said,
Okay.
okay, I can get with that. But then again, how much can you really find from a quick Google search?
I
And
know,
and
right?
if, and if and if we're honest, Rose, my mom, her name is Annette. She
Okay.
named me Jeannette, and I
Oh,
have a sister named Lynette. I'm
oh.
like, what were you doing? What was going on? What?
Names are big. I mean, names are really big. My son's name is Paxton. I'm
Okay,
Italian, so my maiden name was
okay.
Donatelli. I used to love that. My name's Rosemarie Rosella Donatelli. So I
I
really
love that.
thank you. I really love being very Italian. And I always loved the nickname Pax. And that's what
Mhm.
we wanted to call my son. And we were going to name him Pasquale, which is a very Italian name. And then last minute, and we didn't tell anybody because when you tell
Mhm.
people the name, you don't want any kind of like facial, like, oh, yeah, we love that, And so we ended up naming him Paxton. And now we
Uh,
don't even call him Pax. That was the whole goal. But it's funny because afterwards, and I had him, and I was telling my mom, like, oh, we were going to name him Pasquale. And she was like, oh, That's terrible. That's a terrible
Oh, you dodged the bullet, huh?
dodge a bullet. That's what she said. I was like, oh my gosh, because everybody has an opinion, but yes,
They
no,
do.
they're so important. I love that.
Mhm,
So do you have any books in mind that might be good starters for? And I know we can do this kind
mhm,
of, with dyslexia and some of the things you're talking about.
mhm,
But when you said, I love the idea of vocabulary and pairing it with a gesture, and that's kind of
mhm.
that idea of like making it multisensory. Would that be an
Right.
example of that? Do you have like a favorite? I mean,
Absolutely.
because I know when I talk about autism, I have like some favorite books that,
Mhm.
like I always talk about when I go live and things like that. But if you have like a starter book or something that is one of your
Mhm.
favorites where you use this multisensory approach, what would one of those books be?
Okay, so two things. First, I didn't know you were Italian. I'm learning Italian now on
Oh,
Duolingo, so
oh,
shout out to me.
oh, nice.
Second, second, and it's a beautiful language. I don't have any in mind, but I will say family favorites are books that are in series, so
Okay.
that you can kind of continue that. Like, I have a new Pizza Cat book.
Yeah, yeah.
Or My Brother and Me has tons of amazing little stories.
Oh, I don't know.
And then you know what? I'm saying this, and then I feel bad because I was just saying that we should have these diverse books, and now I'm tapping back into animals. So let me get my mind right. But what I will say for those who are like, that's contradiction. Books that are in series are really helpful, and then those that have tons of rhyming.
Mhm.
Um, my son and I think we have a pretty diverse library, but I will say every night we would look at Llama Llama.
Oh,
That was one of our favorites because the rhyming was just so perfect.
yeah.
But
I love that.
we definitely have tons of books over here, and I don't know. I would say that as a parent, I think that that is certainly something you want to make an investment in,
Mhm.
even if it means getting a subscription to highlights, or even as a therapist. I think having that subscription to maybe highlights wouldn't be terrible because you're getting new resources that are around the same, and it's not really changing and making things unfamiliar with that child. So
Yeah, I love that.
that's
And
what I
just
would say.
making literacy kind of a part of their I try to model read. I mean, I'm always reading. Like now it's either
Mhm.
something with autism or it's usually like a business book now. But I really
Okay.
love to read. So I'm always like modeling that. I try to
Mhm.
read with my kids. A really cute book that we just read is called The Gruffalo. Have you ever
Oh,
read
I
that
love
book?
that one. Yeah, they
Yes.
have a movie too. I don't know if you saw the
Oh,
movie. It's so cute.
no. It's so cute. I just read it. My son's teacher gave it to him for like a holiday, Christmas
Mhm.
gift. And the whole class got it. And I read it to him and I was like, oh, I love this
Mhm.
book so much. It's so
Mhm.
good. So then I've been using it. This is what I do. I take my kids' stuff and then I use it for my private clients. And I'm like,
Mhm.
right? I mean, I have
It's all
some
about sustainability, you
Yes.
know?
I'm like, I can repurpose this. Oh my gosh. Okay. So good. I'm feeling very inspired now to incorporate some of these things into my sessions.
Mhm.
So where can people find out more about you and your work if they wanted to visit and learn more about this?
Well, I'm glad you asked.
Mhm.
So, I have a book out now called Technical Difficulties: Why Dyslexic Narratives Matter in Tech. And you're definitely going to want to grab that because I tackle tons of amazing topics like conscious bias and tokenism in the workplace for those who have or who are advocating for those who have dyslexia. Next, I am on Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, Tumblr, and TikTok. You simply need to type in barely articulating, and that's going to be like the actual bear, BEARLY articulating. Um, let's see, I have tons happening on TPT. I release resources very frequently. And I even have a dyslexia screener, a checklist screener for all my SLPs who are interested in doing a quick screen to see whether that child may have some of those vital characteristics or indicators of dyslexia. Go ahead and grab a copy of that. I have one for dysgraphia as well as dyscalculia. And those are some other things that we hear and we're like, oh, I don't know, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot
I know.
pole.
Right.
So, yeah, you can find me there as well. I'm trying to think if I have anything else. I have merch available on Redbubble. And that is like merchandise as far as bags and t-shirts that have all of these great literacy factors on there. You might find the first phase of writing. You could potentially find active reading strategies that are created in really cool merch.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, and it was great to have you.
Thank you, Rose.
Thanks for listening to Autism Outreach. If you enjoyed the show today, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode full of actionable strategies you can use in your therapy room. Write a review too. That would mean so much to me. I always love hearing from you. Have a specific topic that you want included on a future show? Reach out over on Instagram, ABA Speech by Rose, or visit me at www.abaspeech.org.